see, I haven't seen you in at least 10 years. I was
I
thinking,
know, I know, I
isn't
know.
that crazy? Time flies.
It's been a really, really long time, and it doesn't even seem like the time has gone by that fast.
It doesn't.
Just,
It's
I
weird.
remember when you and John came to stay. There was something you guys were doing you were doing a book tour together,
Hmm.
and you came and stayed with me in St. Louis.
Hmm.
Um, was that 10 years ago?
Yeah, it was 10 years ago.
That's insane.
It's really weird. I just remember about that night. You and I got drunk on red wine. We
Yeah, and
talked
John didn't get involved.
yeah, but we were talking really passionately about that show, Mad Men.
Yeah, yeah. That there's never going to be another show like that. That's in my mind that's TV's answer to the Great American Novel.
Yeah, I agree.
That's about as close as it gets to in my opinion that I've seen on TV.
Mm.
Where it's just like nearly flawless.
Yeah, it's interesting to watch Mad Men as a writer or a storyteller because you when you're watching something, you always try and go like, oh, I know where this is going, or you try
Yeah.
and guess. Mad Men would always subvert your expectations. Like you'd always think, oh, of course, this is a story, so this is gonna end up happening, and they would never go there. They'd always,
Yeah, no, and I think it's because Matthew Weiner. I don't think he really knew exactly what was going to go on.
hmm,
Um, I think from what I've read of him and just YouTube clips that I've seen of him, it sounds like it was fairly seat of the pants,
hmm,
and it just worked out. It just really worked out well. But you're right. Not only did it rarely go in the direction you would expect it to, but when you would try to explain to people what happened in the episode that was so worth watching, it sounded terrible. It never did justice to the show.
yeah,
So that's just the writers and the actors making it, phenomenal. But yeah, there are scenes from that show that are iconic to me.
yeah. I wonder about like if you were dropped back in time, like if you woke up and then all of a sudden you were in 1950. Do you think you could get comfortable there and just live out the rest of your life in the 50s?
I've wondered about that because living as a comic artist,
Hmm.
I have wondered if I would have been just very happy getting a job for EC and being one of their illustrators. Um, I don't know. I would have to say probably not, because there are just too many things about that period that are, at least to I think our contemporary sensibilities, pretty pretty horrible. But
Right.
but just in terms of being a cartoonist,
Hmm.
I don't know. I really don't know. I feel like sometimes it seems like it would be really nice to live in an era where you could go work for EC or something like that. And
Yeah.
but then again, there's a writer in me that's I don't know. I wouldn't be able to. But then again, places like EC, a lot of times the artists are the writers as well.
Hmm.
So there might have been some good aspects to that as well. I don't know. But I would have to say no, just because if it were 1950, that means I would never really listen. I'd never hear Bob Dylan. I'd never really hear. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. Motown wasn't around at that time.
Well, you'd
There's a
be
lot of
old.
things that have happened. What?
You'd be old by then. So like you'd wake up in 1950, but then you have to live out the rest of your life starting from there. So by
Right.
the time all that stuff comes around, I guess you'd already know about it and you'd be ready for it. But by the time it came around, you'd be the really old guy in the club.
Right. It wouldn't be of your generation. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, I don't think I'd want to. I don't think so. But I do. I have to admit there are times in the past where I have romanticized the idea of just being able to work as a cartoonist
Hmm.
and support my family doing that. Um, you know,
Hmm.
I don't know. That wouldn't be so bad. That wouldn't be so bad. I don't know. I know you experience it on some level. Being a cartoonist in America is tough.
Yeah.
It's something that you've got to do. You know what? I'll speak from the eye perspective. I'll only speak from. I won't I won't assume anything of anybody else, but my experience has been you do it in spite of anything. It's, it usually is a corrupting factor in relationships. It's usually a problematic factor when it comes to a sense of stability, just how culture in general looks at stability. It can be, unless I feel like, unless you really have to do it, unless you have to do it, I can't see any reasonable reason to continue doing it.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And I always think about that Art Spiegelman quote where he said, "It's not a career, it's a calling."
Yeah, right.
Because I feel like in fact, I was thinking about this earlier today. I got like a folder of my things from my childhood that my father had kept in the mail. He just sent to me, and it's like got my report cards and childhood drawings and things like this. It's all very cartoony. And so I was thinking about it, and it's like that nature versus nurture argument. Like, I think I was
Yeah.
born to do exactly what I'm doing, but like I was born to be a cartoonist by trade. But unfortunately, I was born in an era where that is the dessert of life. Like, it's not things that are necessary in the culture. And as the world is kind of going in this direction where maybe things might just be pared down to necessities.
Yeah.
I wonder about like what the future of somebody who lives off of making the dessert of life is how they're gonna fare. I don't know,
Yeah. It's interesting because like ever since I was young, if you look at it on paper, and I don't mean that, as a pun, if you analyze the value of cartooning and comics, sequential storytelling, to me, it all adds up perfectly. It makes perfect sense. That's, there's no reason why I would pursue any other endeavor. But it just so happens that, that how it adds up on paper and relates to, like me as a human being and looking for a vessel to communicate creatively, it just doesn't always add up perfectly with and then there's the supporting a family side to it. So it's, yeah, it's funny because I remember, I think I've talked to John Porcellino about this, where he has claimed that he didn't want to ever not make his living as a cartoonist.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I have gone the other direction. Like, I don't want to make my living as a cartoonist because I've tried doing that. And what I have discovered is that you make, or at least I should say, I made decisions that were decisions, financial decisions or decisions about stability, and went in directions in comics that I may not have I wouldn't have taken had it not been for the fact that I was, just trying to put food on the table. And what I mean by that is, like, I did a lot more graphic feature stories, working for alternative newspapers, doing a lot of illustration work, when I could have been, what I would have enjoyed, would have preferred to have been working on a graphic novel or one of those, something that I was going to ultimately put into a book. So the older I get, the more I don't want to be influenced by having to make those kinds of decisions. I'd rather just be able to focus when I am cartooning or when I'm working on a graphic novel or on a story. I want to be able to focus on that entirely. I don't want to be thinking about, well, I got to figure out some, and I think maybe you can appreciate this because I know you've worked for a lot of alt newspapers as well. There is that, at least for me, there was always this kind of this part of my brain that was always, trying to figure out good stories and good things that I could produce for papers. And now that mechanism isn't really working so much as it used to. I do kind of miss it. I don't know where we began that discussion. Yeah. Oh, it was just about, I feel the most comfortable, I feel the most myself, I feel the most human when, and at peace, even if there's a deadline. I feel the most at peace when I'm drawing, when I'm working on something, a story or whatever. And getting back to what you asked earlier, if there had been that option, like if I could have worked for EC Comics or something like that, maybe that would have been really nice. I don't know. Maybe, every day just getting up and not having, knowing that that's how I was going to make my living, that was bringing in money for my family, would have been awesome. But, I've heard stories about EC though too, that make me think maybe it wasn't, maybe that's romanticized. I've heard that, I think it was Al Feldstein who, I think he hated it. He was drunk a lot while he was doing the drawing. It was like torture for him, but I don't remember where I heard that story. So that could be, that could be apocryphal.
I'll bet that if you were in the EC stable back then, they probably would have allowed you to write and draw your own stories because you're a really good writer. I think they would have recognized that and allowed you to do that.
I hope so. I think the biggest thing that would have been against me is the speed at which I work. And so, when you look at people like Johnny Craig or Al Feldstein or any of the illustrators, I always have to consider, it is not just the work that they were producing that you see printed on the page. It's how quickly they had to do that.
All right, here's an EC story or a question for you. It's back in the day, and you see these two on the comic rack. Which one do you pick up? You only have enough. This one or this one?
I figure given that choice, I think I would quickly, swirl into madness and probably wouldn't end up with either of them, but would end up in Bellevue. I don't think I could choose. I think I'd go with sci-fi. I think.
Oh, really?
But that's just, personal taste right now. I would go more in the sci-fi direction.
That's interesting. When I pulled these out of my long box for this, I was like, I'll bet you he's going to go for the Two-Fisted Tales because that seems more up your alley than I was like, I don't know if you like sci-fi.
No, I love sci-fi. I love sci-fi. And I think I'm just too familiar with the Two-Fisted Tales stuff.
Okay. Have you seen this comic, by the way? I just wanted to show you this one. It's called Middle Class Fantasy.
No, but that's Rita Hayworth.
Yeah, it's I think it's drawn by what's his name? It's Keith Green is the artist, and then Justin Green's brother.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he did 2 issues of this. I think they're called Middle Class Fantasies, and they're really good. They're like a lot of underground comics are just like like stupid fantasy. Oh, you gotta look it up. It's great. I think you'd like it a lot. Okay, so speaking of like being a cartoonist and looking for steady work to feed your family, if the artist of Dick Tracy was stepping down and they offered that strip to you, would you take it?
No.
Why?
No. Well, because I think, what is it? Is it still something Max Collins is he still the illustrator for it?
I think so.
I just nobody could beat Chester Gould. I don't think I would. Although it's interesting because I've been working on some stuff lately where I've been trying to pare down my the manner in which I draw, so it's not quite as detail oriented. I've been trying to just simplify things a little bit. So I've been doing a lot of looking at various cartoonists whose work I really love, who work in a slightly more minimalist style than I do. And maybe Chester Gould isn't somebody that people would naturally gravitate toward when they think of simple drawing, but he's very good at just creating faces just with little notations. I used to do this in a drawing class where I would draw a Dick Tracy face, not Dick Tracy, but one of us in the Rogue Gallery. Mm-hmm. And I would begin by just a couple of marks. I'm thinking of trying to think of one who was a really good example, but just start with a couple of the marks and see how far I could get before students could figure out that I was drawing a face. And it would take a long time. Like his choice of lines is so idiosyncratic, and just so unusual and so unbelievable, that you really, I found that students had a hard time even figuring out that it was a face.
Yeah.
Until the last few pieces I was, putting on, making it clear that it was a face. So Chester Gould was very good at that. And that's kind of what I've been looking at in terms of like the more minimalist style. But the thing is that I'm discovering that you can analyze certain people's work to a certain degree, but ultimately it's just this inexplicable thing that makes their work so exceptional. And I think Chester Gould is that, you can't you can't uh, you can't imitate him. You can try to imitate him, but I think it's like trying to imitate something that is so genuine and such a signature aspect to somebody's personality that you might as well just try to be somebody else. I don't think anybody could write Dick Tracy but Chester Gould. I haven't read a lot of Dick Tracy that wasn't written by Chester Gould, but I don't think I would certainly not want to try to take that mantle. Would
See,
you?
well, not Dick Tracy. However, I worry a lot about stability financially as a cartoonist, and I have thought about this a lot. Like if the artist from Gasoline Alley was going to step down, and they said, "Do you want to take over the strip?" I would have to really seriously think about it because if it's a steady paycheck, that's something I really value. I might have to do it.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about it from that angle. I know that you have experience of working with newspapers. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. What are you saying? We both had
Okay.
experience working in newspapers
Yeah. So you did. It was a weekly strip in Denver
and in Columbus.
and in Columbus.
Hmm.
So that I would assume, for me, well, I'll start with me and I'll see if you can relate to this. It's addictive. I found it addictive. Did you?
Yeah. Well, I liked having that schedule, definitely. Like every Thursday, I knew
Yeah.
I had to do something, and
Right.
what's it going to be and all this stuff. Yeah, I definitely did. And then I remember when I first got my first strip published in Westward in Denver, I took it out of the bin and I looked for my strip and I saw they had taken my drawing, the printing process. Like I could see my drawing was broken up into little tiny dots, and it was like thrilling to me. Like the
I
first thing
know.
I took it over to a photocopier and had it blown up so that I could see it even better. Like, look at
That's
that.
so cool. That's a really cool idea. I wish I would have done that.
And I was like, oh my God. And I used to, if I had a panel on a strip one week that I thought was really cool, I would blow it up on a photocopier and
Yeah,
then I would paste it onto whatever sketchbook I was using that time. And
that's
that would be
cool.
the cover of my sketchbook. I just loved that because that's one of the tactile qualities that like drew me to alternative comics.
Yeah.
Like this idea that these hippies bought their own printing presses and figured that out. And there were all these misprints and fuck ups and stuff. And did you ever see Rebel Visions, the book?
No.
It's all about underground comics, and there's a sheet in the book. They show a sheet of the Zap covers that are all misprints, and
Oh, really?
I was like, oh my God, look at that! Like it was amazing. All the
Yeah.
colors are all fucked up and everything. It just looks so beautiful. It was like a Warhol silkscreen or something.
Right. Well, so yeah. And so yeah, just on that subject, like with the book I've been working on about Steve McQueen, I'm playing around a lot with getting the feel of comics from various points in the 20th century. So I'm thinking right now of one that I'm doing in kind of this in sort of a the hangs, like the Master of Kung Fu kind of comics
Mm-hmm.
from the 70s. And you can get software that actions and brushes and textures that you can upload into either Photoshop or Illustrator to give you the look of those old printmaking techniques,
Yeah.
which in its own right is sort of, it touches on what I was mentioning earlier about with like EC Comics, whereas like now I guess a new generation of cartoonists are so fascinated by, I know I am fascinated by these old techniques, not only of drawing, but also just print, the printing process,
Mm-hmm.
that has become a sort of an art form would, of something that was once just fuck ups,
Yeah.
So it's really interesting that that's the case. But getting back to just like, seeing, having something that's being produced on a weekly basis, there's just something about that is really, for me, it was really addictive. I really enjoyed trying to, it was, what part of it was feeling like I was a part of this tradition of comic books,
Hmm.
So that was just something that when you talk about trying to make a living, if somebody were to come and say, do you want to take over, for someone like Chester Gould, or I'm thinking, I can't really think of one that I'd want to take over, but it
Wizard of
would be
Id.
tempting. Huh?
Wizard of Id. You take over that. So
Right.
here's a
Or
question though, because your work is so much about Americana, how does that translate when you get translations? Like, what do people in other countries think of that work? Are they interested in that kind of subject?
that's where a lot of the lot of sort of response I get, the excitement seems to come from Spain and France. I think it's more interesting elsewhere than it is here.
See, I'm so surprised by that because the only book of mine that has not been, this is not a brag, but just a fact. The only book of mine that has not been translated to other countries is the Hypo, because
Really?
because I think it's too, they just think of it as like, oh, it's about an American president. They just don't care, but it's not even about politics at all. It's about depression, that book.
Right.
But they just
Right.
they hear what it is and they're just not interested in it.
Well, I have to tell you, I don't know how you're going to take this. That's still one of my favorite books by you. This, you had said it's like a calling.
Hmm.
This is not something that, it's not even a love thing, I don't know if I love it or not. It's just, it's what I do.
Hmm.
And if there's any way to make it easier, what I do,
Yeah.
I would like it to be easier.
Yeah.
So and I'm not alone in that. I think we all, would prefer, we want to live somewhere where the air is good, because breathing is pretty important.
Yeah.
So if there's a way we can get our friends and acquaintances to help make the air that we breathe a little easier to breathe, I'm all for that.
Yeah.
I don't have a natural sense for, I mean, I didn't even know you could write reviews. It had not dawned on me to check the Amazon reviews of my own stuff. So
Was it weird to do that because you kind of put a book out and then it's just out there and you don't really hear anything about it.
right.
Unfortunately, that's the way it goes. And so all of a sudden to discover all these people who have read your work and to see them talking about what they thought of it, isn't that kind of odd?
Well, I've kind of gotten to the point, I think you've talked about, where it doesn't really matter.
Hmm.
I think with the first book, it was a big deal because um, Abandoned Cars was like a real milestone for me. It was getting to a place, it wasn't just a graphic novel. It was making a statement in a way that felt really genuine, but also Fantagraphics was like the place I'd been shooting for as a publisher my whole life. The people they produced, the Hernandez brothers, um, Chris Ware, Daniel
Clouds.
Clowes. I
Hmm.
mean, they had been producing the people who even turned my attention to comics as a viable vehicle for creative expression as a storyteller. Prior to that, I didn't know what, you know, I thought maybe I was a writer, maybe I was an artist. I couldn't decide which. Um, so that was a real milestone. And so I paid a little more attention. But ever since, it didn't take me long to realize that nothing is quite as beguiling. I don't quite know how to put it, but it's confusing than at least my relationship with writing and producing stuff, because the last book I want to read is whatever I just wrote. But the first thing I want to get into is what I'm working on right now. So it's almost like the publishing process is it's like a part of the process, but it's a part of the process that I'm not a part of anymore. Up into getting the stuff off to the publisher, that's my job. But I feel like once it's over, I really just what's got me excited right now is what I'm working on right now, you
Right.
know, and the potential for it. As soon as that's gone, and so it took me a little while to realize that that milestone wasn't actually a genuine milestone. It was a preconceived milestone. It was something that I assumed was going to be important. Um, but once I passed by it seemed like, no, it's the next book. Although I did go back recently and kind of read through for the first time everything that I've written, officially published, just to see if there was, just to see, I don't know why, I guess kind of to see if there was any consistency there, or if there was, and,
Yeah.
and I was happy to see that I at least was communicating something that I think was the best I could do at the time when I wrote that stuff.
Mhm.
Uh, and I did feel, I still felt I wasn't embarrassed by anything, and I felt like, okay, not that I thought that there weren't mistakes, because there were, but I could see where what I was thinking when I was doing that particular thing. And so, but otherwise, I'm not all that particularly interested in going back and seeing what I did in the past, or really even see what other people thought of it.
Hmm.
That's not completely, that can't be true though, that just can't be true.
Well,
I don't know. I feel like it's a relationship, I don't feel like producing comics is, it's not like I'm not interested in what people, I'm very, it's for me, it's about communicating.
mhm.
Um, it's about finding some connectedness out there, but maybe it's just because I haven't figured out what that connectedness looks like after the books are finished. I don't know. There's a lot about, I think, the world of trying to be a creative individual that doesn't always make sense, that doesn't really add up when you try to intellectualize it.
Hey, let me just put a plug in here about this, because this is your newest book,
Yeah.
and I spent uh, like almost all day yesterday and this morning reading it. I really enjoyed this a lot, and this is really a
Good.
great book.
Thanks.
And so most of this stuff was published in your newspaper in St. Louis.
Yep. That was all. So I was writing a weekly strip, weekly illustrated vignettes. It's hard to even describe it because there isn't really a standard for it. It was kind of something that I was living in New York, and I was trying to get some publishing house, some newspaper, magazine, somebody interested in just letting me go out and write stories and illustrate them. Just go out and do what I do. And finally, there was an editor at the New York Press, uh, John Strasbow, who said, "Why don't we take this, and instead of writing these long stories, just write like 300 words, just like a vignette, and you can illustrate that, and that'll be a weekly thing."
Wow,
And so I just thought that was a fantastic idea.
that's an amazing
So
opportunity.
it was incredible. It was incredible. And so I started doing that. And then when I moved to St. Louis, I went to the Riverfront Times, which is the kind of the equivalent of, it's just the alt weekly in St. Louis, and pitched the idea to their editor, who really liked it, and I continued doing it there. So I must have done it there for 3 years, and about a year in New York before I left. And yeah, I mean, I've never had a better job than that. That was just incredible. Like literally, my job was to go out and experience interesting things around the city and talk about them in my voice. Not like I'm trying to be a propagandist for New York or St. Louis, neither of which needs a propagandist.
Mm.
But just kind of, so it was a really unique opportunity, and I was really excited to do it. And I look back on it and sort of miss it. But I actually stopped doing it once Abandoned Cars came out,
Mm.
because I was like, well, now I'm just going to devote myself exclusively to graphic novels. I don't know what I was thinking. It's like, oh, well, suddenly there's going to be all this money that you're going to make from your graphic novels.
Yeah.
So you're never going to have to worry about money again. But that wasn't the case. There was a period of time there where it seemed like opportunities for creative ventures were just amazing. The money was pretty good,
Mm.
and it was like, oh my gosh, this is extraordinary. But when you're living in it, you don't realize that it's going to come to an end.
Mm.
And frankly, I'm at a point in my life now where I'm on the other side of it, where it's like, uh, how do I get back to something that feels more like I don't know, just, where possible things are possible again.
Mhm.
Right now, it feels like it went, from 2000 to about 2015. There was a period there, especially, like 2000, 2010, where I remember where art directors everywhere I went were really accepting of and interested, enthusiastic about some pretty unusual approaches to things. But things have, from what I can see, from my own experience, things have grown more conservative
Mm.
and less edgy and willing to try pioneering unusual things. And
Yeah.
I don't know why that is.
Well, I have to take your word for that. I've never gotten any. I've never had any kind of illustration career like you have. Like you've worked for a lot of big name places, and the most exciting thing I recently got that you did was the on the road cover.
Yeah, yeah.
That's one of my dreams, is to get Paul Buckley to let me do a cover of some of those, one of those classic books. You're of that lineage. You're kind of that, well, like we're saying, like the Americana
Yeah.
style, which is,
You don't need to even describe it too much. I think I know what you're talking about.
yeah.
And I think, the McQueen book is sort of, in a sense though, the McQueen book is more of a critique of that than it is in anything else. Because, I've gotten to a point in my life where, well, and I'm a father now,
Mhm.
and I'm thinking about some of the stuff that, some of the masculine traits I was raised on, some of the, you know, masculine, just person stereotypes, whatever. And I'm really kind of questioning, how much of it is relevant today.
Hmm.
There's a lot of, like, for example, I'll just throw some examples out there. Like when I was growing up, when I was, 5, 6 years old, like Evil Knievel was the man. Like he was always doing his jumps. He was very popular on TV where my brother and I grew up. But I look back on that, and they a lot of toys were sold to kids my age, um, that were all about Evil Knievel. He was a franchise, but as a human being, he was not the most palatable person.
Hmm.
And it makes me kind of wonder what people were thinking back then, to have taken this guy who, well, I don't want to bash Evil Knievel. I mean, it's like bashing your grandpa in a way, because it's like, Evil Knievel was a big part of growing up in the 70s. But he's a bit like that, that grandfather you have who makes the racist comments once in a while, and you're just like, you know what, we can't just kind of laugh about this anymore. We can't just be embarrassed for you anymore. This has got to change. Somebody's got to bring this to your attention. In the same vein, I think McQueen was a lot better person, frankly, than Knievel. But a lot of masculine traits that were toxic, that I wouldn't want to pass on to my son. I wouldn't want my son treating people, women in particular, the way McQueen did sometimes. You know, the book is, in a sense, me trying to dive into a conversation with myself, my father, my grandfather, all my uncles, um, and have this big duke out over whether anything that they passed along to me was healthy.
Well, have you learned anything about Steve McQueen while working on that book that you didn't know that kind of disgusted you or something? What are you figuring
Um,
out?
yeah. He treated his wife, who was his best friend. She was a very dedicated person and was his best friend, but he, regularly cheated on her. He regularly, it wasn't even a thing. It was just like he would tell her about it. And that was, kind of, we're so accustomed to people cheating on their spouses and stuff. I think especially in kind of a Hollywood setting, that it doesn't even really raise an eyebrow anymore. But I will say that in the case of his wife, she was, not that anybody deserves that sort of treatment. Nobody does. But she certainly did not.
Mm.
If anything such as deserving this sort of thing existed, she did not. The research is endless. It's
Oh,
about the world in which he lived. It's about the people he knew. It's about the kind of everything, the cars, the kind of technology of the cars, what the cars were capable of, what, kind of what was on the, what restaurant would have been on the corner, if he, it's a very complex thing where you kind of start feeling like you're not really living in 2020. You're living in, whatever, 1968 or 1954, 1972. That's the thing. It's like once like things start to spread,
mhm.
at least I've found, like, new directions for storytelling approaches suddenly reveal themselves.
Uh-huh.
An experience, it's just like and I don't know about you. How do you feel about being so invested in one person's life for so long?
Oh, it's so weird because you kind of become that character after a while, don't you?
I find it's almost like I feel less like him than I ever did.
Really? Wow.
Well, yeah, because I mean, there are just certain things that are I could never treat. Well, there are just so many things that I look at with McQueen in it, and I think I could never do that, or I would never be like that, or
Well, I guess what I mean is I identify with him for the sake of writing the character. I have to be him. Like I anything that I find out that Joseph Smith did, I have to then take a few walks and think about why somebody would do that.
yeah,
You have to figure out like what the motivations are, and you have to convince yourself that that's the right move that this person would make. So I put myself in those shoes and think about like, because otherwise it's gonna be written so unrealistically. Why did this person do that? You have to figure out why they did it.
yeah,
And that's been a really difficult thing for me personally because I'm writing a story from the 19th century. So I have to find the right kind of writing that is almost, it's like a mutated version of 19th century writing because it'll be a snore fest for like somebody from our era to read
yeah, totally.
the
I
way
think
people spoke.
the writing style there then in general was, I mean, stuff that was, bestsellers then,
Mhm.
just in unreadable.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely unreadable. So like the way I'm writing is from the perspective, each story, and it's a story cycle. So it's essentially like it's going to be a book of short stories that all come together under a theme.
Mhm.
And each story I'm writing from the perspective of, and it's never a single person. And I don't think in any case is it ever actually from McQueen's point of view. It's usually either an overseeing writer, or more often than not, it's from, people who claim to have known McQueen during the making of The Great Escape, for example, or, you know, some of it might be true. And that's another thing is I'm playing around with it, like who's telling the truth, who's not telling the truth. Because I think one of the things that makes at least American celebrity really interesting, maybe celebrity in general, but storytelling is just like whoever tells the truth about anything, and like, is it even possible to tell the truth?
Mm-hmm.
I got a question for you. So, you know, when you produced the hypo, it seems to me that the manner in which you illustrated it was much more detailed than, say, Fonte Bukowski has been. Well, first of all, would you agree with that? And if so, was that a conscious decision?
Well, there's two different styles of storytelling there. The hypo is drawn, you know, on actual comic book pages and stuff, and I was trying to, and I was doing a lot of dense cross hatching because I couldn't really draw very well. That was the whole reason for that. Monty Bukowski is a humor book, and I always think that humor is better when it's quicker, when it's more simple and more expressively drawn. So that's my own feeling about that. So Fonte Bukowski was actually drawn in sketchbooks. It's very small. So yeah, so it was just dashed off really quickly, like a joke being told, and then scanned in and colored really fast.
Is that a labored process for you? Like,
No,
did you draw Fonte Bukowski 1,000 times in a quicker, you know, slapdash sort of way to kind of?
I spent no time on it. Like I mean, Fonte Bukowski literally was. I worked at Panera Bread in Denver. I had a sketchbook. I would be making sandwiches during the lunch rush, and in my head, I'd be thinking of a joke. I just wrote down, like, here's the story of Fonte Bukowski. He does this, 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 and this. That's the end of the story. And then I just filled in the dots there with as funny as I could, you know, like as funny jokes as I could, and thinking about stuff from my own life. Like when I actually did go to a Dave Eggers signing, and I gave him a copy of Blammo, and he was not interested at all in it, you know. So like I was just pulling all this stuff from my own experiences and putting it through this desperate writer character. But I spent no time. I didn't fuss over it. Didn't care. It was just supposed to be like immediate and funny. And then I would finish a page and post it on social media, and it was great. Like I didn't stress about it. And I think that's the way it has to be. If it's supposed to be lighthearted, I mean, it's who gives a shit? Just like tell a joke. Like don't worry about it at all. Like, because people can see that, man. They can see when they look at your work if you're having fun.
Yeah.
If it's supposed to be a fun story, then just have fun with it, man. Who cares, you know?
Right. I don't know if this is true for you, but it's true for me. Like when I draw something that I know is the way I want it to look, like I just know.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no I'm not in crisis over it. I'll be in crisis over it maybe 10 years later, and I look back and go, you were not as good as you thought you were. I'm a big fan of haiku. And one of the things I love about haiku is like this stuff, the suggestiveness of everything, and kind of the negative space, and the precision of words and stuff. And so I'm really in, you know, I'm looking for that in this manner of cartooning that is simplified from the way I ordinarily draw. Whoever says Charles Schulz was, you know, had an easy job, man, I don't think it was.
Yeah, no, it's so deceptively simple. It's true.
Getting that circle and those, you know, squiggly lines and the two dots, you probably labored over it for, you know, the whole day.
Hey, when is that Steve McQueen book coming out?
I have no idea.
Oh, really? Who's the publisher for it?
Fantagraphics.
Oh, okay.
And they've been expecting it for a long time. It's just, I am drawing myself into a box. Like I've gotten to the point where the amount of detail that I feel is necessary, it is just, it's like I have gone as far in this direction as I think I can go without losing it, and without, you know, and actually get something done. I've gone off the rails with.
Oh man, I'm so interested, and I can't wait for it to come out, man.
Me neither. But you know what's weird is that also, like, I feel like I could work on it my whole life too and be satisfied, you know?
Oh yeah, you don't want to be that guy though.
Okay.
Hey, it was great chatting with you, man.
You too, Noah. Always great.
All right.